This video is to explain how I'm doing modern Hebrew vocabulary review using Anki. If you don't have Anki, you can find it under apps.ankiweb.net, and they have versions for Windows, Apple, and you can even run it on your Android, which is where I prefer to have it. But for this demo, I'll be showing it on the Windows version. Now, Anki by itself, you can manually add vocabulary cards, but if you're trying to learn modern Hebrew, it's better to get a deck. There are multiple decks out there, and the one I picked was this Modern Hebrew Alphabet Duolingo Hebrew from Scratch. I'll put this link into the YouTube video comments. And now this is a newer deck. The deck I originally downloaded was, I believe it was from April in 2024. So this one was updated about 4 months later. It's probably still largely representative, but I've noticed they've added in images and things which is not present on my older deck. However, it's still probably going to be still pretty close to the same. So this is what it looks like when you have it imported. Now, I made some modifications, a number of modifications. So the first one is you have all these units one, and it actually goes much further than this. And when I started, I was working my way through the units, and then I found that there was a lot of duplication. These units correspond with the actual Duolingo course, which I don't know how accurate this would line up with what Duolingo has now, but these units would line up with the course, and then they had skill sections. Now, I did a check, and what I found is that the vocabulary in Unit 1 would be, some of it would be duplicated in 2, and so forth. And so you would have a lot of extra cards to review across these units than if you just went through the skills sections. And I didn't figure this out until after I got to past Unit 14, and then I started to realize, oh, well, if I do skills, then I'll have fewer cards to review. But I didn't want to like start over, with all my reviews. So I deleted all the skills uh, prior to adverbs. But if you were to start new, I would just delete, the whole unit section and just go with skills. And it pretty much follows sequentially, so you might find like adverbs might be spread across, let's say, unit 15 and 16, and family might be in 16 and 17 units. Um, Now the other thing here is how you prioritize reviewing the cards. I've been doing this for almost a year now, and there's a huge number of cards in here. I go over and look at the entire collection. And there's a little pie chart. Here we go. We have about 16,000 cards in here, which is a lot. And these would be fewer if I had started on the skills, but not by a huge amount. It might be like 13, 14,000 or something. But it's a lot of work to try and get through these. There's a lot of words that have different conjugations. For example, the attached pronouns and so forth. You know, like my house, your house. Beiti, uh, Becha. Those variances of the words. I kept all of them. You could go in and just eliminate all the personal pronouns. I think that would be a mistake. Uh, so that's what drives a lot of these the number of cards. I did do some deduplication. There is an app that you can add on to Anki. You can do a little bit of deduplication. I'm very, very, very cautious about that. Didn't really give me a huge benefit, but it is something to consider if you want to deduplicate the reduce the number. But the sections are split out, and so you can work through them sequentially. Now, the decks themselves, if it would say I browse a deck, one of the things you're going to find is they will typically have the cards 3 times. So they will have it Hebrew to English, then a card that's English to Hebrew, and then a typing test. You'll also find that these will be multiple choice in one direction, and then when they present the Hebrew to you, you'd have to be guessing, what the multiple choices, and then you get to the typing test. This isn't like absolute. There are some sections where they're a little bit different. In the skills section later on, I forget which one they do it a little differently, but pretty much when you're looking at that 16,000, just imagine that 1/3 less would be the typing test. So where they present the English, and then you have to properly type in the Hebrew word. So, that does drive it up. And so what I did was you could get through 2/3 of this deck pretty quickly if you focus on, the multiple choice, and then kind of push out the typing, but maybe just add in typing, a little bit at a time, because it is more difficult, than the multiple choice, because you can kind of deduce what the answer is by the multiple choice. And so a lot of my reviews have been, when reviewing cards, have been driven up simply because I've been going ahead and working on multiple choice. So although these look like a huge number of reviews, I go through them pretty quickly, in about an hour to 2 hours. It's probably less for these, but there was a day yesterday where I did about 1,000 card reviews, but they're all multiple choice, and I got through them pretty quick, and then they got rescheduled out here over these 3 days. So, and then once they get through these again, it's then going to push them even further out. And so then, what I'm left with is I'm now left with, after going through so many cards, which if we look at the pie chart here, I've got about 4,600 that I haven't done yet. The majority of these are typing tests, and they are the most difficult. I've done a lot of typing tests, in this the 60%, it probably represents about 20% of those. But this is the most difficult part, is, not just recalling it, but also spelling the word correctly in Hebrew, which can be a real challenge because there's a few consonants that are easy to mix up. Now, if I take an example here, here's an example of a multiple choice, hachanot, which would be preparations.
הכנות.
So I got it right. Now you'll have the answers you can choose from, and primarily when if you didn't get it right, it would be again if you were like, oh, this is so easy, like bite for house, you might do easy and it push it out really far. For this one here, I knew it, but not like super well. I could sit there and I could say, well, it's kind of hard or it's good. Now, for this one here, I've done it so many times and I've gotten it right so many times that it probably really doesn't matter too much, because you could see 12.1 months versus 1 year, which you would think that this is greater, but I think they're rounding to a certain degree. And then here's, degree. So I believe this one is Toar.
תואר.
So this is what's tricky, is that you might sit there and go, well, is this an aleph or is this an ayin? Or maybe, a tet, or the other one, So which I forget. But I got it right. I knew what it is, and so you can see here the times are different now because this was a card that I've been really struggling over, whereas the other one was easier. Multiple choice is always easier. So, I'm reasonably confident, but I'm still going to do good. So, the yin and the good are going to be your primary ones. I'm going to come back to that, or I'll come back to that later. It's part of my reviews. It's so this is going through this many cards. One of the things I found is that I'm also working through a grammar book, and if you're not working through a grammar book, you're doing yourself a huge disservice because the attached pronouns and why is a root verb conjugated in different ways. You really need a grammar book for that. And I've been using Brandy's Modern Hebrew, Grand Hebrew grammar book, and I'll put a link for it up on Amazon. It's an older book, but what it does is it also has the Hebrew handwritten script. So you're getting two things at once, which you may never use it. And so if you're just on the computer, it's like with me, it's probably pointless, but I do it anyways. Uh, and there's a lot of overlap here. So if you wanted to, read, from, a modern Hebrew New Testament or the Torah, that wouldn't be too big of a problem. Although the Old Testament, a lot of the words are, if you read them literally, it doesn't quite come out the same, with an English translation, like the face of the earth. You would take that as okay, the surface of the land. Um, so that can be a little tough, because if you're trying to sit there and understand what's being said, it's there's a lot of little interpretation, of the literal words. It's not literal face on the ground, but there's a lot of that in the Old Testament. But I've also found that while this helps a lot, I still get stuck in reading. So, for example, I've been like reading in a modern New Testament that has both Hebrew and English, because it's nice because the page layout on one side has the Hebrew and the other side has the English. But I'll still run into words where I'm like, I don't know what that means, and I go look at it in English, and then I'm like, oh, I've been reviewing that card, for 3 months, and I can answer it correctly in Anki, but for whatever reason, even though I'm even seeing the vowel pointers, in this New Testament, sometimes I'm still not able to get it. And so it's good to do some form of reading parallel to it because you might find that you're just not really, I mean, although you're answering it here, you just might not, just pick it up as you're, reading along. And then the audio here is great because, and I wouldn't say every card is perfect. There are some cards where the audio is just, you know, um, they put the wrong audio on, but it's not a lot. And there's a few where they get plural, masculine, female reversed, and it's a really easy fix. I just go and I edit the card, and but you'll run into it might be 1% of the cards, if that. It's very rare, but it'll throw you off completely. And then I found some where the English explanation for it, while technically correct, could could really confuse you into thinking like enough. Can be three or four different Hebrew words, and they will have enough in there, and then they'll have it as three or four different Hebrew words with different cards, and so you'll be thinking, well, which one is it? Well, I mean, kind of tough, and so you'll run into a unit, and and the unit will be, it should be must speak, and the other one it'll be die, and you won't know, all right, well, which one is which unless you just happen to pay attention to what unit you're in. So that's one trick where you might consistently get those two mixed up and get them wrong, and you won't want to really cheat and say, "Well, I know it." Well, maybe you don't know it. And and so that's a tough part. So I've tried to edit the English explanation to try and narrow which one it is. Now, in that particular case, I'm kind of at a loss because I guess it could be used either way. But once I get a proper Hebrew interpretation of the difference between the two, then I'll go and and then clarify the card. Now I have another thing that I use. And let me see if I find it here. It's well, no, not Nikud. Bookmarks, favorites. So it's Hebrew conjugation tables. So I found that sometimes when the explanation isn't very clear, I'll go in there and go look up the words. So I know this is, at least I hope I know, um, R, no,
עפרונות,
Ephrono. No, I got that wrong. Yeah, this is a problem with trying to do it on a video. But it's a good example. So if I come over to the conjugation table and I plug it in, I can then scroll down and, of course it's pencils. I mean, but you can see some of the others, but you can also look at the root. And the roots are kind of handy in these conjugation tables because maybe, you might be reading along and you might spot, the root letters, the root signal letters. And so we go look at, and it's pencil, but then we see afar, earth, dirt. And you might be able to rationalize in your mind, okay, well, it's the dirt is like spelling something. It's like, if you took the dirt and you put it on top of concrete and then, drew out a word with the dirt, that may be where they're deriving pencil from, is it's pushing the dirt onto something, it's pushing a mark, and so that these little things might help you, to try and recall a word. The pencil is derived from the word for, dust, ashes, earth, dirt, it's discoloring something. And can't think of anything else. But yeah, so that's what I've been doing. I've probably got another year before I get through the first review of the cards because the stats, are there's just so many cards here. I mean, and this is aggressively pushing into it. But and then after that is probably another 2 years to just get, to solidly get through the reviews and get to. Right now I'm at 60%, almost 61% mature. I think in a year I might be at 70% mature, even after getting all this 28%, down into the young category. It's still going to take a while of, practicing the cards in and out. Most of the mistakes I make are spelling mistakes. It's usually not like I just did, where it's a big one, where I just got the whole word wrong. But that's the trick with learning, is to learn it under pressure and be able to answer it quick is tough.